Something happened over the summer of my 5th grade year. A crazy thing happened. My voice started to crack. My skin complexion started to change. You ever experience that in 5th grade? Maybe for you it was a different time, but for something happened for me. And then when I got to 5th grade and I go to the classroom, this crazy thing happened, something I'd never noticed before. There's actually cute girls in my classroom. I didn't know they were there. I didn't even know they existed. And I looked across the room, and there was this cute little girl that, wow. She was not only cute, but she was smart, and she was popular, and I wanted her to be mine. Now, I did something that was so out of character for me. It was just one of those things that a 5th grade boy does that starts this whole process. And I decided that I had to ask her this question. I had to ask her whether she was willing to go with me. Now, I have to tell you, as a 5th grader, that means absolutely nothing. I'm not going to talk to her. I'm not going to hold her hand. I'm not going to sit next to her. I'm not going to even play with her, but I want her to go with me. So that's just, there's no thought necessarily of what that means. I just want her to commit to me and say, I love you. And so it's crazy. I started to scheme. And I decided I'd go to some of the smarter boys in class who had already done this and say, how do you do this? And go, well, you got to buy a ring. A ring, really, a ring. So I go down to the local store. I robbed my piggy bank as much money as I could scrape together. I think it was $1.50 that I finally got together. And I thought, and I might have had another quarter. I think maybe $1.75. I got that money together and I went down and I bought the best ring you could possibly buy for $1.75. And then I took that ring and I wrote on this note, I still remember it, man. I said, you are so cute. I really like you. In fact, I love you. I would love you to go with me. Check the box, yes or no. And then I wrapped the note up, signed it, wrapped the note up. And of course, I wouldn't give it to her in person. That's way too personable. So I waited till we got in class until where I could get the attention of my other classmates. I wrote her name on the deal, and I sent the note with the ring wrapped up in it across the classroom to wait for the answer. What is she going to say? That's really the topic of today. It's this one great big question. Do you love me? Do you love me? That's this question that Jesus asked in John chapter 21. And he asked it at a time that surprised everybody. It's at the end of the Gospels. In fact, John chapter 21 is the last chapter of the story of Jesus told by his best friend John. And John had written the entire story. He told all about how he lived, all the miracles he did, all the cool stuff that took place. He told about the moment where he went to the cross and he died on the cross, and then the tomb was empty, and he told about how he was resurrected. He appeared to 2 different times to all the disciples. So this is the end of the story. This is the end of the gospel. And then there's chapter 21. And it centers around this one question. Do you love me? Here's how it starts. In John chapter 21, it says this: Simon Peter, Thomas, who's nicknamed the twin, Nathanael from Cana of Galilee, the sons of Zebedee, and 2 other disciples. So just count them up. If you're good at math or not, that's 7, by the way. 6 plus Peter makes 7. So there's 7 of them. Peter said, I'm going fishing. Now, when I go fishing, I love to get ready to go fishing. Now, I took my son-in-law fishing this last summer, and we were going king fishing, and he took a look at my net, and he said, that is way too small for the kind of fish we're going to catch. So he actually made me go down and buy a bigger net. Now, this net hasn't had anything but small fish in it, to be honest with you. I have no idea why I paid so much for this net. But I got this great big net to go fishing. So I spent a bunch of money. I get all my equipment together. I back my car up. I load the boat up, and I travel. Sometimes I travel an hour. I like to go to Banks Lake. I like to fish the Columbia River. I love to go to Coeur d'Alene and fish for the Northern. And sometimes I'll drive a whole day to go. When Peter says, hey, let's go fishing, here's what it meant for him. Take a look at the screen here. This is kind of interesting. The screen kind of says it all. This is, if you Google, say, how far is it from Jerusalem to the Sea of Galilee, or the Sea of Tiberias is what they call this. It's just a simple 123.6 mile point-to-point walk. Elevation gain, 13,743 feet. That's almost as high as Mount Rainier. It's crazy, huh? So when Peter says, let's go fishing, he's not just saying, let's go fishing. He's saying, we're going on a camping trip. We're going to be staying a couple of nights. We're going to be walking at least. And I love what this description says. It's a moderately challenging route. It takes about 47 hours of walking. So he says, I'm going fishing with you. Come on. And it's kind of funny. So when they finally get there, I want to show you what it looks like. This is a picture of the Sea of Galilee. And it's kind of cool. We stayed at this hotel, and you get up in the morning, you have coffee, and you look out over the Sea of Galilee, and you can still see the fishing boats there. They fish for the same fish that Peter and all of his disciples would have fished. And I hope someday you get to go there. And boy, we need to pray for Israel right now, don't we? We need to pray for that whole. In fact, let's just stop. Lord Jesus, would you help that country and those people in the midst of their crisis today? May they find you and help from you in the midst of all this. In Jesus' name. So here's this picture. It's the Sea of Galilee. And I look out across there, and I can't help but think about that moment in John chapter 21 where they said, let's go fishing. And here's what they said. We'll come too. So the other 6 guys, he mentions to the other 6 disciples, so clearly more than half of them say, we'll come too. They all said, so they all went out and got in the boat. And then it says they caught nothing all night. Now, I am a good fisherman. As some of the men and the men's camp will notice that I did win the fishing competition this year. Right? I did win that. I won that this year. But there was a day that actually something crazy happened. I took my wife out fishing, and she was catching all the fish. And I think she had a special lure. She spit on it or something. I don't know what she did. And then I looked over, and Daniel had his boat full of guys, and they were just catching fish, one right after the other. And I yelled out to them and said, I can't catch a fish. And they felt sorry for me, so I went over to the boat. They actually threw the lure they were using so I could catch fish because Audrey was catching fish. So I put on their lure and still caught nothing. I fished the entire day and never caught a fish. And everybody just made fun of me. Can you imagine the frustration of Peter? The fisherman. That's his business. Can you imagine the frustration going up? Now, here's why this frustration is kind of important. Because Peter had just traveled 121 miles to go fishing with a group of guys that he was going to teach how to fish, and they're catching nothing. And what he's actually done is led them away from what they're knowing, what they're supposed to be doing, which is discipling people. So I have a question for you. Have you ever gone back? Have you ever left what you know and gone back to what you used to do? There's a whole bunch of news these recent days, and I even think some of the news agencies are encouraging it. They're saying after COVID, people are leaving their faith more than they ever have. The church is on the decline. There's all this big stuff about how people are leaving their faith. But I want you to hear something today. Anybody that has genuinely experienced God doesn't leave their faith. Because if they may step back for a while, but what happens is they can't live with it. They have to have what they once had. In fact, recently I just read an article. Barna did a whole research on how millennials, remember millennials are leaving their faith? Now there's 40% of them that are going to church, and it's this huge change. They're saying, we don't know what happened. I know what happened. They're returning to something they experienced that they can't live without. And Peter had stepped back, and then he took these other people with him. And if you've ever wondered about this, your decisions are always going to lead other people too. So they'd step back. Peter's frustrated. The frustration level's growing, and then this happens. The next verse. Here's what happens. Throw out your net on the other side of the boat, and you'll get some. There's a guy on the shore who looks at them, and they're frustrated. He said, throw out your net on the other side of the boat, and you'll get some. So they did. And they couldn't haul in the net because there were so many fish in it. You know what happened? Jesus showed up on the fishing trip. I love it when Jesus shows up. If you've ever wondered, he shows up in all kinds of places. He probably has in your life, he has in my life, he has in everybody's life. And this is so cool that they're in the midst of their frustration and Jesus shows up. And you know what Peter did? He recognized this because this happened one other time in his life, and that was at the very beginning of his ministry. Before he ever decided to follow Jesus, Jesus told him to throw the net on the other side of the boat. And he immediately we got fish. It's Jesus. He jumps in the boat and he swims to shore to see Jesus. And when he gets there, in fact, the next verse says, when they got there, they found breakfast waiting for them. Fish cooking over a charcoal fire with some bread. Now, if I didn't know better, I think Jesus was showing off at this moment. He's got a charcoal. They've been fishing all night. He's got some fish on the shore. That's kind of cool, isn't it? And I think this is important because a lot of people think that Jesus was, when he resurrected from the dead, he was just a spirit or something. No, they had genuine, crazy experiences with Jesus. The risen, physically body risen man called Jesus Christ, who showed up again. He caught some fish. He started a charcoal fire, and he put it on the fire, and he cooked him breakfast. And the next verse gets to the heart of the question of the day. After breakfast, Jesus asked Simon Peter, Simon, son of John. Now let me stop here for a minute. Why is he calling him Simon, son of John? You see, Simon, son of John is what Peter used to be called. When Jesus first met Simon, son of John, he said, you're called Simon, son of John, but I'm going to call you Peter. And so now he's going back to where he first met him. Remember, he's going back to that moment that he first called him. And he says, Simon, son of John, do you love me more than these? Now, I like that because here's the question that I have. What are these? I was thinking, he's looking at the 153 great big fish that they just caught. Somebody actually counted them. 153 fish. He said, do you love me more than the fish? Do you love me more than your fishing business? Do you love me more than your boat? That's one possibility. Or the other possibility that these could represent the other disciples. Kind of like saying, hey, are you better than all these guys? Do you love me more than all the rest of these guys love me? And if you know Peter, he was a brash, braggadocious man. He was always the guy that said, Jesus, I'm the one that's going to stand up for you. You're the Son of God. He's always the first one. And here's this moment for him to say, you know I'm better than these guys. You know I'm better than these guys. This is just a reminder for Peter of the first time that Jesus met him. So let's go backwards in time and look at Matthew chapter 4, verse 19. In Matthew chapter 4, verse 19, it says this, come follow me and I will show you how to fish for people. You can show them that verse. Come follow me and I will show you how to fish for people. In other words, are you willing to leave your nets? Are you willing to be different than everyone else? This is just about you. Come follow me and I'll show you how to fish for people. And he left his net behind. He left everything else behind. He left his business behind and he went and followed Jesus. And for the last 3 years, that's what he's been doing. But now Jesus finds him stepping back from what Jesus called him to do. And so he challenges him. Do you love me, Peter? Verse 15 goes on, John 21:15. Yes, Lord, Peter replied. You know I love you. Then feed my lambs, Jesus said. I want to give you my version. I call it the Dan's Authorized Version. In other words, I'm going to just translate it the way that I kind of want you to see this, because I think there's something really important for you to know. The Greek words tell the story a little differently. So here's my version. It's this. Here's the question. My version says this. Peter, are you all in? Because the word that he uses for love is agape, which means I would be willing to die for you. Are you all in, Peter? Do you really love me more than fishing or any of the other disciples? And Peter answers, Jesus, you know what? I'm your friend. He doesn't say, Jesus, I'm all in. He says, you know, I love you. I'm like your friend. This is such a weak answer. This is not the brash Peter who so quickly will tell everybody how good he is and how he's going to step up and no one else can be better than him. Now he is humbled because he's miserably failed. And he's not sure that he can genuinely say, I'm all in. No more boasting. And he's avoiding the question. So how about you? Do you ever avoid the question? Do you love me? My wife is famous for asking me that question. And she asked me that question at the craziest times. It's like, just recently I was going to go on a week-long elk hunting trip, and right before I go on the elk hunting trip, she says, honey, do you love me? And it's like, I said, you know, I told you that years ago. Why do I need to tell you that again? What's the deal? I know what the deal is. She's saying, and here's what I'm really afraid of. She's asking me, do you love me more than your week-long elk hunting trip? Because I've been preparing for this a long time. I'm really excited about this. And then she's wanting to know, do you love me more than elk hunting? Well, I've learned the same deal. when there's clothes all over the closet floor, I'll just say, honey, do you love me? Do you ever, so I want you to think about it. Do you ever avoid this question? Do you love me more than this? And Jesus says this to Peter, then feed my lambs. Then feed my lambs. You have a job. Right before he left and went up into heaven, he says, you need to go and make disciples. If you're going to be my disciple, you need to make disciples. You need to disciple someone. Feed my lambs. Now, some of you are here and you say, what does it mean to follow Jesus Christ? Well, to follow Jesus Christ means you become a disciple that disciples. So here's a question. How in the world do you disciple someone? We here at Awaken have been trying to define that for you, help you understand that. Let me tell you three ways that you can disciple someone, and I'll illustrate it. The first way is this way, and that's simply to ask the question, tell me your God story. Tell me your God story. Now, I had the chance on my week-long hunting trip to spend a week discipling a young man who did not want to be discipled. Now, it's kind of funny. This young guy is dating a girl that grew up in our church, and I have a heart for this gal. And this guy that was on our trip, he's a special forces guy. He'd spent 20 years in the special forces, and man, he had some really cool, good stories, and I loved his stories. But what I didn't love is that this guy, who was 20 years younger than me, had never been elk hunting, but decided to take the time to teach me how to elk hunt every day. He thought he was discipling me. And not only did he know how to elk hunt, he knew how to live and everything about life. And he was so quick to tell me everything about my life and how I should live my life. And I figured if he can tell me how I should live my life, I can disciple him. So at one point, I asked him this question, hey, have you ever had a God story in your life? Has God ever showed up in your life? And he's quick to tell me he'd never had a God story in his life. And I smiled and I thought, oh, this is so cool because this is his God story. And I looked at him and I said this. I said, I'll tell you what, I want to promise you a God story this week. And here's what we're going to do. If you will, for one day, not use the F word, because he used it every other sentence. I said, if for one day in talking with us, you won't use the F word, I'll pray to God and he'll give you an opportunity in an elk. I didn't know which would be more of a miracle, him not saying F or God showing up and giving him an elk deal. It didn't matter to me. God was got to show up. I was thinking, why not try it? This is crazy. I said, what have I got to lose? This could be a God moment for him. So I challenged him. I said, hey, I'm going to tell you, God's going to show up if you just quit using the F word. And then we started making fun of him. We said, you can't make it all day without an F word. It was like on and on and on. And he says, I'll do it tomorrow. And so he used a whole bunch of them that day. And then he said, yeah, we said, not a chance in the world. So the second question, that's the first question. You got to have a God moment. And can I say this to you? God shows up in so many ways, and he always shows up in everybody's life. Everybody has a God moment. It's just whether or not they will accept it or respond to it. The second thing is this. You ask the question, when's your last God encounter? I remember every day I'd get up, I'd be reading my early morning, I'd get away, and I'd read my daily verses, and I was kind of tired of this guy telling me how to live my life. And I would come in for my daily dose of how to elk hunt, and I shared a verse with him. I remember this, it was like the third morning. I got to Ephesians in my devotions, and I was reading, and it says, you are a masterpiece, created anew for the good things I planned for you. And I thought, oh, this is such a cool verse. And I walked in the room and I called him by name and I said, I got a verse for you today. This is something I just read. God spoke to me and I think it's good for you. You are God's masterpiece. And he's made you especially for things that only you can do. I said, that's the greatest thing today. He was so silent. It was like a long period of silence that took place. It was awesome. So I started doing it every day. It was so cool. Eventually, you know, one of the times I did ask him about his relationship with God. And he says, God and I had a falling out. God and I had a falling out. And I said, you know, God didn't go anywhere. You did. And I challenged him to think about that. And we get to the third question, because this is the third question that everybody needs to understand. Who are you discipling? So you ask people, what's your God story? And you figure out where they are. And then you say, hey, what's your last God encounter? You figure out whether God's still active in their life, whether they've stepped back or whether they're active in their life. And then you know how to work with them. And the third thing is you recognize that you disciple and you teach them to disciple, because the question is, who are you discipling? If you're a disciple of Jesus Christ, you're always discipling somebody. In fact, I want to say this to you. You cannot keep what you will not give away. You cannot keep what you won't give away. And if you want to have a faith in Jesus Christ that's powerful, you have to be giving it away. And Jesus asked this question. Do you love me more than these? Then feed my sheep. Disciple somebody. Now the story goes on. In John 21:16. It says this, Jesus repeated the same question to Simon, son of John. He says he repeated the same question. Do you love, and he uses the same word, agape, all in. Do you love me, Peter? A little less now. He doesn't say, do you love me more than all these? He just looks at him and he says, are you all in, Peter? And then Peter answers the question, yes, Lord. Verse 16, he goes, yes, Lord, Peter said. You know I love, and he uses the word phileo, which is a friend zone answer. You know I love you. I'm your friend. It's not exactly what Jesus wanted. Have you ever got a note from somebody who said, how about let's just be friends? You're dating them, you love them, you think it's awesome, and they say, hey, let's move to the friend zone. That's like a death note, right? That's what you can kind of see Jesus doing here. He's saying, hey, Jesus, hey, Peter, do you really love me? Are you really committed to me? And Peter's saying, man, I'm your friend. I don't know whether I can be committed. So here's the question. How much do you love? How much do we love Jesus? Are we just in the friend zone, or are we all in? He's committed to us. Are we committed to him? It's funny to me, so many people want to come to Jesus under their own terms. They have a whole list of things. Like they said to Jesus, hey, listen, I will love you. I'd like to be your friend, but listen, no long-term commitments. I don't want to have this to the church thing and all that stuff. That's not for me. And by the way, I don't want to change a lot. I just want you to forgive my sin and help me whenever I need you. And so don't change me. No way. Hey, and by the way, I have a pronoun and you need to accept it the way it is. And that's just the way it is. I'm going to come to you and tell you how to live in how you want me to live. Now, Jesus say, hey, listen, are you all in committed? How much do we really love Jesus? John 21:16, Jesus said to Peter once again, Simon, son of John, take care of my sheep, Jesus said. In other words, set your net down, quit fishing, and start discipling. But then he doesn't leave it there. He asks the question a third time. In verse 17, he says this, a third time he asked him, Simon, son of John, do you love me? Oh, but something crazy happens. Jesus changes his word from all in, Peter, are you all in, to he looks Peter in the eyes and he says, Peter, are you even my friend? He changes his word to match Peter's word. And here's how Peter responded. It says that Peter was deeply hurt when Jesus asked the question a third time. I was thinking about that. Why do you think that hurt him so much? You know, the last time he was around a coal fire, he had just bragged about how he would never deny Jesus. And now he found himself in a coal fire in a courtyard of the high priest, and Jesus was being tried, and somebody asked him 3 times. Asked him 3 times, and then the rooster crowed, and he realized that he had completely failed. And he saw Jesus' eyes. And he went out and he wept bitterly. And now, they're sitting around a coal fire, and Jesus asked him the third time, Peter, do you love me? And Peter was reminded of his failure. And failure hurts, doesn't it? I got the note back from that little girl. She sent it back across the table. I got it. I opened it up. She didn't check either box. She wrote in big letters across the whole note, "No way!" exclamation point. And it hurt. Failure hurts, right? I think Jesus asked this question. Do you love me? Peter responded, he said, Lord, you know everything. You know that I love you. And he never uses the word agape. He never says I'm all in. He says, you know I'm a friend. In other words, Peter's saying to Jesus, you know how I failed you. You know I never was all in. You know I messed up. And I'm not sure I can be all in. That's really what he was saying. But I love Jesus' response. Then feed my sheep. I know about your failures. I know about all your stuff. I know all this stuff, but I want you still. I still want you to be my lead disciple. This is so cool. If you're here today and you have a whole list of failures and all the reasons why you can't be all in for Jesus, he says, hey, do you love me? I still want you to be a disciple that disciples others. And then he does a crazy thing in verse 18. He tells Peter exactly what's going to happen. I tell you the truth, when you're old, you'll stretch out your arms and others will dress you and take you where you don't want to go. He was predicting exactly how Peter would die. And if you don't know how he died, Peter died on a cross. And right before they hung him on the cross, he said, I want to be hung upside down because I don't deserve to be hung in the same way my Lord was. Peter loved, agape loved Jesus. He was all in. How about you? The real question, the big question all day is, do you love me? Would you bow your heads just for a moment? Maybe today, this is your day to just say, I'm all in. This is a great time for you to do that. Just open your hands on your lap. And just say those words to Jesus. I love you. It's so powerful. I love you. It's perfect time. He hears it. He hears it. Now I want you to look at me. You remember that Special Forces guy right before I left? I remember saying to this guy, which, by the way, the next day, I don't know whether he swore. I think he did, but he missed an elk at 30 yards. And I said to him, I said, I think God showed up. I don't know whether you did, but I think God showed up. And I want you to know something. I don't know whether you and God had a falling out, but I know this. God still loves you. And if you'll let him, he'll give you some direction for your life. And if you said today, I love him, he'll give you direction for your life. But there's one more thought. If you're really a disciple of Jesus Christ, you should be discipling others. Now we're going to do a crazy thing. At the end of the service here today, the band's coming, they're going to sing. And here's what I want to challenge you to do. On this cross, you'll see a bunch of names already written on this cross. I just began to think, maybe some of you want to start by writing your own name on there saying, I'm all in. But these are really the names that I want you to write on there. God's going to lay on your heart some people he's put in your life for a reason, and he's calling you to disciple them. And what I challenge you today, I challenge you to write names all over this cross, front, back, whatever. There's a bucket with pins there. We have 2 or 3 people writing on that cross at the same time. It's perfect. So I really encourage you. I want you to write down every name that God is laying on your heart right now. You're supposed to be discipling these people because you cannot keep what you don't give away. So I challenge you today. Would you stand and answer the question, do you love me? Then feed my sheep. Who's the sheep that God has given you? May God bless you as you respond.